William, hopefully your favorite videographer from Two Hats Publishing. I welcome you to another Two Hats special of community events. Let's look in and see what's really happening.
Okay, friends, we are going to get started. So if we'll ask people to take their seats. So thank you, everybody, and welcome to our hard conversation. Thank you to City Square. Larry's right here, and he's participating today. Thank you, Larry. Thank you to City Square and to the Dallas Public Library for co-sponsoring with us. The reason I kind of decided pretty much on my own that we needed to do this hard conversation specifically was because I heard an interview with the author on Think, and I was astounded by what he was saying, and I said this really fits into our efforts that have been going on since September of working on the problem of racism and homelessness. 60 to 70% of the homeless population in Dallas are African American, while African Americans only make up about 13% of the population itself. So there's a huge disparity there, a huge overrepresentation, and so we are working with the Center for Social Innovation, with the support of United Way of Metropolitan Dallas, to really try to crack that nut with some action and some research at the same time. And so this really fits very well into that. And I knew that there was one guy to do the job, and that was Randy Mayu, because as Larry told me many, probably years before I met Randy, by the time you walk out of here, you pretty much have read the book. That's Randy's superpower. So I was like, I got to get Randy to do this for us. And once I had set that in motion, I discovered that Tom Shapiro himself was actually going to come to Dallas 6 days before. So I was like, oops, what do we do now? Randy very wisely advised me that we should do this anyway, and it proved true because Tom Shapiro was here, and it was exciting to hear him. But he didn't really, talk about the entire book. He, spoke about a few ideas and took some questions, and it was so what we're going to get today is way more beefy. And Tom Shapiro himself is quite excited that we're doing it, so that's nice to know too. Randy's going to talk about the book, and then after Randy is finished, we're going to invite Larry James from City Square. And we're going to invite Pastor Mike up here too to give us some more context for how this all figures in Dallas. So with that, Randy, come on up, take it away.
So there are a number of ways to start this today. I'm going to start with a quote from the man who wrote the book, the song Joy to the World, Isaac Watts. And he said, quote, "Acquaint yourself with your own ignorance." And we are an ignorant people. I listened to a podcast from a national public radio program just this morning. Within the last week, it's a national program on poverty. And I got to tell you that I'm not an expert on poverty, and I know a lot more than every guest on that panel. They haven't read enough, and they all had too narrow a view. So we're going to talk about poverty, and we're going to talk about, let's see, David, which one of these microphones do I need to walk around with? They all on? Okay. So we're going to be trying to figure out about poverty, and we're going to try to do a couple of things that are vivid and visual in addition to slides and the handout. But first, a few introductory slides. So you've got Toxic Inequality, the book that I'm going to get to in a few moments. August 28, 1963, one of the great, profound and accurate lines from I Have a Dream. 100 years later, 100 years after the Emancipation Proclamation, The Negro lives on a lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of material prosperity. That's 1963, and Dr. King himself used the word Negro then, and it is a speech that if you have not printed out and read instead of listening to excerpts, you ought to print it out and read it. But this idea of the lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of material prosperity. This is Dallas, and this is 2000, and this is 2013, and the rust-colored areas are the areas of high poverty in Dallas. Larry James will know more about the specifics of this than I do, and Larry, I don't know if we have a map newer than 2013, but my understanding is that the area has grown. Much worse. So this one is good. It's worse since 2013, but I want you to think of the imagery of the island of poverty in the vast ocean of material prosperity. So in an interview that Larry did on NPR a while back, it's not acceptable for a city as full of wealth and opportunity as Dallas to be ranked third or fourth poorest urban center in the United States, behind Detroit, Memphis, and Philadelphia. So that's where we are as a city. So the book Toxic Inequality. Why the word toxic? And the book itself doesn't use this definition, but I looked it up. Toxic is poisonous, capable of causing death or serious debilitation. Toxic means it hurts everybody it touches. The inequality is toxic. So, there is inequality between races. This is not income that you're paid for working. This is something called wealth. And I want you to look at this gap, and now, as delicate as this is, but this is in the book, I want 10 African American volunteers to come to the stage. And I have not asked anybody to come. I need 10 African Americans to come to the stage. We've got 1, we need 9 more, we've got 2, we need more, we got 3, 4, we need 10. I need 10 African Americans. And I want you to know that I wish that I didn't have to do what I'm about to do. I want you to stand together. I want you to clump together. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay. And now I want 1 brave Caucasian non-Hispanic volunteer. 1. Here we go. I'd like you to stand over here. I have a bag of money. And we're going to pretend that this is the entire amount of money that the people on the stage have. This is everything they have. Everybody got the concept? So, everybody get ready. By the way, you can keep what I'm giving you. All right, tell this audience how much money was put in your hand.
10 cents.
10 cents. Now, we could add zeros to this, so it could be $1, $10, $100, $1,000, $10,000. But basically, let's kind of think in terms of around $10,000. That is the amount that the average African American family household has in America. Right at $10,000. Now, wealth, this is called wealth, isn't the money you make from your job this month. It's money you could get your hands on if you sold everything you had that is an asset. Any home, equity, anything. Wealth, 10 cents $10, $100, $10,000. Now, I just put into this hands man 10 dimes. So he's got $1 for every 10 cents of this group. Again, you can multiply it by the decimals. This gentleman has $100,000 in wealth. The average white, non-Hispanic American household has wealth of $100,000, 10 times this, and I hate to tell you, I'm being dishonest. It's actually slightly more than 10 times. This is actually 8 cents a piece. I didn't want to count pennies. So 10 cents versus 10 dimes, $1. That's the reality of racial inequality. Let's give all these folks a hand. Okay. All right. It's just easier. Okay. And I really debated whether or not to do that, but that is one of the major points in the book, is that this is the gap. And so you've got, you see it goes down and down, went up a little, went down, and this is the gap that is inequality between the races in the United States of America. In a few minutes, I'm going to tell you part of why that happened historically. All right, the United States is near the top of inequality. And so if you look at this range of countries, you'll notice Italy, the United Kingdom, and the United States. And in yesterday's New York Times, there was an article about a person who was describing inequality in Great Britain. And it was describing how a young college graduate coming from a poor background who has a degree from Oxford or Cambridge cannot get the same opportunities that a person from a wealthier background can get, because that poor background person has the degree but can't afford to live anywhere in London. And there are other pieces of that puzzle. Check the New York Times yesterday for that article. So we're back to toxic inequality, Dallas Public Library for today. And let me darken this, and now we'll go to the handouts you have. So, what do? I read books, and I help people know what's in them. For 20 years, I've read business books, and I prepared a synopsis with a multi-page handout of the content of a business book every month at an event called the First Friday Book Synopsis. For 12 years, I have done something exactly the same for books on social justice, poverty, race, education for City Square. And that meets on the third Thursday of every month. And you're all welcome and invited to either or both of those events. And so this morning, I blogged on my blog about there are 10 CEOs interviewed by McKinsey on what they're reading this summer. So 10 CEOs, there are 33 books named. Everybody had 3, and one person had 5, and one person had 4. And out of 33 books named, there were 2 that I would put under the umbrella of social justice. One of them is Hillbilly Elegy, which is the very famous book that's now becoming a movie, and it's about kind of the Rust Belt and the white workers who have lost their jobs and their way. And the other one is the award-winning book Evicted, which is a terrific book, and I have presented both of those, synopses of them, at the Urban Engagement Book Club. But what struck me was that out of the 33 books being read by the top 10 CEOs invited to answer this by McKinsey, only 2 dealt with the human struggles that I would call social justice. So, this book, Toxic Inequality, How America's Wealth Gap Destroys Mobility, Deepens the Racial Divide, and Threatens Our Future. So, I'll begin with, we're just going to follow the sheet you've got, get your pens out, mark them up. Here we go. Why is this book worth our time? Number 1, this book helps us understand the wideness of the gap that makes up toxic inequality. Number 2, this book helps us understand the systemic, even policy-driven processes that contribute to this widening gap that is toxic inequality. Put a star beside number 2 and think legalized segregation for decades. About 3-4 weeks ago, my wife and I took a vacation we hadn't in a couple of years. We took 8 days. We went to Atlanta, Birmingham, Selma, and Montgomery. We went to all of the civil rights museums. We stood in Birmingham at the park where the bulldogs and the fire hoses were set loose on the people, including the children, in 1963, where Martin Luther King Jr. was arrested. We walked across the bridge at Selma. We went to the spot in Montgomery where Rosa Parks was arrested. But here's something interesting. In Atlanta, in Montgomery, we could have seen this in the other cities, but there are neighborhoods where African Americans lived and live that are so much poorer than neighborhoods right nearby. And if you're not aware, there have been a couple of new books about this, but basically the federal government, this book does chronicle this, the federal government set up a system where African Americans were not given the same government help that isn't really help, it's normal. For example, it was legal for lenders to not loan money to African Americans for houses. That was the same money available to white families. It was legal. It was legal for the government to keep agricultural workers off of Social Security in the early years. Guess who the agricultural workers were? Predominantly African American and Hispanic. All of that is chronicled in this book, Toxic Inequality. And so we saw that on our trip. I keep reading about it. I was rereading some work by Taylor Branch on the trip. It's just breathtaking how our policies added to the widening gap. Number 3, this book helps us understand why work ethic alone, why resolve and hard work alone will not lead to shrinking that gap that is toxic inequality. I don't want to throw too many book titles at you, but if you've never read the famous Nickel and Dime by Barbara Ehrenreich, she's a woman, a white woman with a PhD. She describes the hard work that a server in a restaurant does, or a person who cleans a motel room. They couldn't work any harder, and they cannot get ahead. And we're going to look at a couple of facts about that on this handout. All right. The next section are direct quotes from the book. You'll notice what I call it the best of Randy's highlights. You know, the part I underline. And so everything I'm reading for the next few minutes is a direct excerpt from the book, Toxic Inequality. Now, you need to know that what Tom Shapiro and his team did was they interviewed representative families in 3 cities. And then they got lucky and they got funding and they went back and they found the same people and they interviewed them a decade later. So they were able to track what happened. Every name in the book is a pseudonym. They're keeping the privacy of the people, but the stories are accurate. So, number 1, Our conversations revealed that the crisis was clearly still unfolding. Most of the families we talked with were reeling from job losses, adjusting to reduced incomes, or having trouble making mortgage payments. He's talking about the 2008 financial crisis, so even the ones who were getting a slight bit ahead were in trouble. Number two, we must understand economic and racial inequality in tandem. How vast wealth disparities and racial injustice do real harm to individual families, and how powerful institutional forces rather than individual choices distinguish those families who get ahead from those stuck in place or falling behind. Keep your pen handy. Mark one of these that grabs you. I'm going to have you pick a favorite and talk to the person next to you in a few minutes. So, pick one. Number three, some critics view poor people as suffering from character defects, such as a lack of ambition or work ethic, welfare dependence, or an inability to defer gratification. Patricia, one of the subjects in the study, pseudonym, didn't actually have these traits. President Barack Obama provided perhaps the crowning moment in this new public attention to economic inequality when he proclaimed in a December 2014 speech that inequality is, quote, the defining challenge of our time. But the president's speech referenced income inequality 11 times and wealth inequality once. Leaving wealth out of the conversation is a crucial mistake, giving fodder to those who would make personal poverty the result of personal failings. So let me go ahead, and I'm jumping ahead a little, but let me talk about this wealth inequality. If you come from a family with practically nothing, when you're starting out as an adult, you have practically nothing. When you come from a family that has plenty, that family gives you the down payment for a house. That is an enormous jump start. And it turns out that the people with money know the precise limits. A grandparent can give a child $14,000 a year. It helps the grandparents' taxes, and it allows the child to have a college fund. So if you come from wealth, by the time you hit college, you've had 18 years of $14,000 a year put aside for your college. I'd just like to say I would have liked that to have been true with my college. And so when Barack Obama talked about inequality, he was right to call attention to the disparity in income. We're talking about money you make from working. But it's a mistake to ignore wealth inequality, which makes an enormous difference. And this book really is the best I've read on that subject. Number 5, wealth is not just a matter of money. As our interviews revealed, wealth is also about power, status, opportunity, identity, and self-image. I recently spoke where I met a family. Let me think how to tell this story without getting in too much trouble. The patriarch invented something that everybody in this room has used. The company manufactures it. You've all used it, trust me. There is a lot of money in this family. And children, and then the grandchildren, and the great-grandchildren are all not just set up, but genuinely wealthy. And now they are planning what to do to preserve their money and to use it effectively for their family. And people like Bill Gates and Warren Buffett are beginning to say, how do we use it for others, which is really good. All right, number 6, looking at a representative sample of Americans in 2013, The median net wealth of white families was $142,000 compared to $11,000 for African American families and $13,700 for Hispanic families. So you can see that when I said my dime illustration wasn't enough, the gap is bigger. In short, the basic pillars of economic security, wealth and income, are today distributed vastly inequitably along racial and ethnic lines. If you're white, you have more money in wealth, average, in the United States. Turn to page 2. Number 7, works helps us improve our earning power and shapes our adult lives in time. If we're born to the right family in the right neighborhood, this is worth underlining, if we're born to the right family in the right neighborhood, if we secure the right job, and if the policy landscape favors it, we might amass a certain amount of wealth. At the end of the day, we might pass that wealth to the next generation in the form of inheritance. And through it all, government policies can either help multiply our opportunities and our wealth or obliterate them. I had this thought this morning. You know, all of the talk about how people getting welfare should have drug tests. You know that talk? It hit me, what if everybody who took the mortgage deduction had to have a drug test? Because both of those are government help to people. And I've got a hunch that you're not going to get far recommending a bill where everybody who gets to take the mortgage deduction has to take a drug test. That's just a side thought. I'm being snarky. Number 8, one landmark British survey identifies wealth as a bigger influence than jobs or educational achievement in determining the lifespan of people aged 50 or older. If you have wealth, you live longer. Number 9, no matter how it is measured, economic mobility is far rarer than assumed. All right, I'm getting ahead of myself, but we have this imaginary ladder that people climb up. They're born in poverty, they get to the next rung, they get to the next rung. What they are discovering, what this book says, and I'll end up repeating myself, is that the rungs of the ladder to climb up are getting farther apart than they used to be. And fewer people are climbing up the ladder. In other words, if you're born poor, you're more likely to stay poor. And this is where it's really bad. The rungs of the ladder have gotten closer for dropping down. And there are more people dropping down a rung or two than we've had in a very long time. And this is why you read about the shrinking of the middle class. All right. Number 10, toxic inequality is created, magnified, and reproduced partly through the struggles through which we seek homes in neighborhoods highly segregated by income, wealth, and race, which in turn confer inequitable opportunities and financial rewards. One of the curious things to do is to just go back and look at the house you were living in when you were 5 years old. And that will tell you a lot about what your journey has been. Number 11, disparities in neighborhood opportunity. Public school quality, crime rate, home value appreciation, access to public spaces, availability of quality employment create divergent living contexts. Number 12, India, that's not the country, but one of the persons, a pseudonym. India witnessed firsthand the white flight as the neighborhood tipped from owners to subsidized renters, from white to black. Black people started moving in, white people started moving out, and then the neighborhood kind of was crashing down. Everybody circle number 13. I did not know this. Indeed, America's number one homeowner today is not an owner-occupant, but one of the world's largest and most successful private equity companies, Blackstone Group. With almost 50,000 single-family homes acquired since the housing crisis, it is fair to say that no single entity in history has placed a bigger bet on the U.S. housing market. People couldn't keep their house. Blackstone moved in and bought it. Now the neighborhood becomes more renters than owners, and it ends up in a spiral that hurts the neighborhood. I did not know this way until I read this book. Number 14. Research suggests that economically segregated neighborhoods harden advantage and disadvantage by making economic mobility more difficult. Number 15. One recent study found that the middle class, families earning between 2/3 of and twice the national median income, or between $42,000 and $126,000 in 2014, the middle class had shrunk from 61 to 49% of the population since the 1970s. We are no longer a majority middle-class country. Quality jobs that provided access to employment capital were crucial. Such jobs, however, have become more the exception than the rule among American workers. I'll talk more about that in just a minute. Research has shown that children whose families, if I put a star on this, especially those of you with young children and grandchildren. Research has shown that children whose families have even small amounts of dedicated college savings are 3 times more likely to attend college. A little college money gets them into college. Number 18. According to one estimate, all right, another place to put a star, Walmart's low-wage workers cost U.S. taxpayers an estimated $6.2 billion in public assistance. Food stamps, Medicaid, subsidized housing, because their wages are so low that they qualify for those safety net programs. So it works like this. 30, 40 years ago, somebody who did not have a college education but was ready to work would work in a factory. They were paid a living union negotiated wage. They got good benefits. Now, the person who has the same level of capability has to accept a lower paying job. And it does not have the same benefits. Are you all aware that the people who clean the Walmarts don't work for Walmart? They work for Acme Janitor Company. But not really. They work for themselves. They're private contractors, and the company hires them as a private contractor, and then that company is hired at a Walmart. This may not be true with every Walmart anymore, but it used to be. And so, because they do not have a full-time job, they don't get the benefits of a full-time job, and that's the way it's working in America. All right. What number was I at? 19. Number 19. Tremendous gain in lifetime earnings due to attainment of a college degree over a high school diploma, $1 million, some college, $700,000, associate's degree, $500,000, is well documented, impressive, and important for individual mobility and better job security. Every $1 increase in average income over a 25-year period converted to $5.19 of wealth for white households, but only 69 cents of wealth for African American households. Historically, African Americans were systematically denied possibilities to build world wealth, even as government policy delivered copious and bountiful wealth-building opportunities to some whites. Racial injustice is both cause and consequence of African Americans' economic status. As it does with home ownership, American society materially encourages other public goods, retirement savings, higher education, entrepreneurship, primarily through tax expenditures. Toxic inequality is not inevitable, it is not intractable, nor is it unpredictable. Social Security, FHA, GI Bill created opportunities for many World War II veterans, helped an entire generation of white families build wealth through home ownership and higher education. Overwhelmingly, however, those advantages did not extend to people of color, in the early years especially. And the federal government should strengthen the right to bargain by easing legal barriers to unionization, imposing stricter penalties on illegal anti-union intimidation tactics, and amending laws to reflect the changing workplace. All right, those are all the quotes I chose. Everybody pick one, turn to the person next to you and say, this is the one that grabbed me. Everybody just have about a 60-second conversation. Go. Recommendations I would have is if there's something on this sheet of paper that grabs you, take a picture of it with your phone, send it to a friend, tweet it out, Facebook it out, whatever it is you do with such stuff, and let's keep the conversation going. All right, turn to page 3, and now kind of my summary of the key content of the book. On the left, on page 3, it's the author's own summary of the content. Toxic inequality syndrome is a product of sustained economic hardships, family adversity, frustrated aspirations, and the persisting uncertainties of life in communities with few resources in times when more and more risk has been shifted to families and individuals. Toxic inequality often produces not only material deprivation, but also psychological and even biological changes in children, blocking and cementing families' trajectories and poisoning the lifeblood of communities. We must reverse direction. All right, I've already told you about the subjects, and I will tell you that for those of you in the room who are data people, you'll want to read this book carefully. It is oozing with data. So lots of studies and statistics, etc. A couple of stories. There's a wonderful story in here about a woman, pseudonym named Rachel. And when she was a young woman, she graduated from college. And she's African American, she went to her poor neighborhood in a major city, and it was desolate and many vacancies and boarded up. And she found a house that she bought with cash, the entire house, for $1,500. She was offered $60,000 2 weeks later. She stayed there until this book, so the rest of her life. When she bought it, it did not have a front door. She put on the front door, she fixed the walls, she fixed the floors, she modernized the house. She loved that house. But her reason for buying a house in that neighborhood is she said, if people like me don't move back into this neighborhood, there is no hope for this neighborhood. I like that. And then from General Motors to Walmart, take a look at your sheet. Walmart's average salaries are under $10 an hour. General Motors' starting wage in 1970 was the equivalent of $23.58 in 2015 dollars. The transformation from General Motors to Walmart captures the grand sweep of America's changing job landscape over recent decades. Average pay is going down, down, down from $24 to $27 in the 70s to $12 to $16 now. This story, the story of the two resumes, is repeated in this book. It's repeated in Lean In by Sheryl Sandberg, related to gender, men and women. This one is race. But I'll use the name that pops into my mind. If you take an exact same resume, exactly, and it comes from Russell Johnson, and it also comes from Lakeisha Williams. That's the only difference. And by the way, it's true with men and women on this. It takes 150 resumes to get one response back for Lakeisha Williams. And it takes 100 for the white-sounding name. So the African-American name is discriminated against. Lots of studies prove this, and this book describes that. And that's why it's so unfair. And a snapshot look at the situation in Great Britain. I've already mentioned it from the article in the New York Times. All right, if you were in my class, I would tell you to take your pen out and circle this next section. Just circle the whole section and stare at it. This is what it takes to make it. It takes a good start. It takes a good neighborhood, and the good neighborhood has safety and stability and a good education. Michelle Kinder is here from the Momentous Institute, and what year is this? The 4th year of Changing the Odds? 5th year. And they have a workshop seminar event in the fall called Changing the Odds. The title. Whoever came up with that should go into advertising. That's the title. Changing the Odds. And so, you have a good neighborhood. And then you have some inheritance to help with that jump start. And then a good further education. And it turns out, this is really interesting, and I'm probably mixing two books together. If you have an associate's degree from a community college, it's not as good, anywhere near as good as a 4-year bachelor's degree. But an associate's degree from a community college actually gets you a better job with more money than a 4-year degree from a for-profit college. So, don't have time to really elaborate this. And then a good job with good benefits, retirement benefits, health care benefits. Simple observation. Where you live, a chunk of your life, wherever you live, a chunk of your life, especially in the formative years, greatly shapes your economic destiny. What are the kinds of inequality? There is income inequality. You make less on your paycheck. There is wealth inequality. You don't have enough in your assets in the bank account. You don't have enough dimes that are yours. That's wealth inequality. And pay attention, racial inequality. All are bad, but wealth inequality may be more bad, that's probably bad grammar, than we had realized. That's my grammar, not the author's. What about this wealth inequality? In the United States, it's uncommonly high. The wealthiest 1% owned 42% of all wealth in 2012 and took in 18% of all income. So they have more wealth than income. I've already defined toxic, the unequal ladder rungs. To climb up, the steps are getting farther apart, and too many are going down the ladder. Turn to page 4. So many poverty penalties. In the United States, research has shown, this is one of many, that children whose families have even small amounts of dedicated college savings are 3 times more likely to attend college. But if you save for your child's college, even a little bit, before you know it, you've got enough there that it kicks you out of government benefits, and now you're in trouble. So there's a penalty for trying to do the right thing for your children. Government policies, we've got the direct payments versus the tax advantages. They're unequal for sure. This is the idea that I said, the great advantage of home deduction for interest. And one example, the declining power of the Pell Grants. I'm sorry I didn't write down the specific number, but it's something like this. 20 years ago, going to college, a Pell Grant would pay $7 out of every 10 that you need. Now a Pell Grant pays $2.90 out of every 10 that you need. So the decline in its value has gone down. Solutions must be comprehensive. I've been doing books on social justice for over a decade. This is the common reality, the common wisdom in the best books. Goes back to David Shipler and the Working Poor, and it's every good book since. A tentative, piecemeal, or fragmentary response will not suffice to create equity and family prosperity. Instead, we must take bold steps and enact, circle this, multiple interconnected policies to transform America. Any agenda for change must strengthen housing and community stability for families, emphasize quality jobs with higher wages and benefits, ensure retirement security, provide quality education, encourage savings, and reform tax policy to foster both equity and mobility. In other words, it's going to take a lot. The next section is the book and its table of contents. At the bottom are my 5 lessons and takeaways. Number 1, there is, in fact, great and growing, widening inequality. Recognize this. Pay attention to this. Spread the word about this. And an aside, read a couple of books so that you have the figures to quote. Number 2, do not buy into the myth. Though there are individual exceptions and outliers, hard work does not result in massive numbers of people taking great steps up the ladder. There are a lot of people who work hard, waiting on tables, cleaning hotel rooms, and a lot of other jobs who cannot get ahead. Number 3, the inequality is toxic, poisoning so much in our society. Number 4, though we should marshal all our forces, all nonprofits, all charity efforts, every city square and Hope Cottage and whatever nonprofits are represented in this room, you can't fix it with that. It will take changes in government policies to reverse this and make a genuine difference for the better. Thus, who is in elected office matters. Number 5, if we do not acknowledge this toxic inequality and address this, then the long-term consequences could be the true undermining of society as we know it. Now, a couple of kind of footnotes. One of the book subjects, the themes that I've read a lot of in business books, is the rise of the robots theme. Automation is going to take more and more jobs away. The number 1 job in America, in terms of numbers of people doing it, is truck driving and driving. Self-driving trucks are coming. Amazon is already opening stores where you don't need a cashier to get out. Think about what that means. So, this book doesn't deal a lot with that. But a lot of argument is growing that enough jobs are going to disappear. We need to look at guaranteed universal income. That's not the subject of today. And then, for those of you who like a little more reading, there's a terrific book also on inequality called Weapons of Math Destruction. I did this one at the Urban Engagement Book Club just a week or two ago. It's by Kathy O'Neill, who blogs under the name The Math Babe. And she's got her numbers down. All right. My bias. The more information we have, the better conversations we can have. And the more informed conversations we can have, maybe the progress can begin. I'm honored that David has invited me back to do this today. I really love the work that many of you do, and I hope we can tackle this toxic inequality. I hope you found this useful. Thank you very much.
So like I said, now we're going to invite up Pastor Mike and Larry. Where's Larry? There he is. To give us some context for Dallas.
Good afternoon. Indeed, I'm humbled and delighted to have an opportunity to share a little bit more about what we've heard, particularly in the context of Dallas, possibly extended into the context of North Texas. I want to be very, very clear with what I'm going to share with you now. I believe when we think about things statistically, we reside in the most hateful region in America. I think one of the prevailing legacies of Dallas and North Texas is one of hate that has been supported by and advanced by an agenda of racialized violence in many manifestations. And I think that's something that we must glean and talk about with a clear thought, with eyes wide open, about the intentionality that has come about in creating the impoverished realities that we see. That again, as the author has mentioned and as has been reviewed, it is not a pathology amongst Black, Latino, minority communities. It's not a lack of initiative or drive. And it's not just about economic or institutional structure. We're talking about very real violence that has a very real body count that continues to be perpetuated in urban and rural communities all over America. We're talking about the crushing of Black Wall Street in Tulsa. We're talking about the bombs that rain forth even in South Dallas. We're talking about the militarization of our police that has been used to enforce segregation throughout our society. And in many ways, all of us, to some extent, are responsible. To the extent that we have benefited from these realities. And might I suggest that is the most damning and difficult part of our fight and challenge today, is that in order to eradicate poverty in America, we've got to deal with notions of white supremacy. We've got to deal with white privilege and white fragility. And we've got to even recognize that amongst our liberal or progressive-leaning white people, they are liberal and progressive to the extent that it does not impact their own pocketbooks. But as soon as they are made discomforted, or the demands of the people rise beyond their willingness to comply, even they retreat to their silos of white privilege and allow individuals to continue to struggle for themselves. So I want to leave opportunity for conversation, but really I think if we're going to have a true conversation about inequality, racial injustice, we've got to deal about notions of white supremacy. And here's the thing that I think is important to say. From 2010 to 2013, that median wealth for white family increased. It was an increase from 138,000 to that 142,000 that we heard today. For Black families, it was a decrease from 15 to 11,000. So we're moving in the opposite trajectories here in this nation. And when you look at the political landscape, it seems very clear that we're likely to get worse before we get better. So I'm happy to have the conversation today.
Thank you, Reverend. Several years ago, I'm not sure that my partner, Joe Britt, will remember this or not, but Reverend Britt asked me a telling question one afternoon as we were talking about this very thing. He said, "Are you telling me that you're supportive of a system that will place my grandchildren on a level footing with your grandchildren in terms of opportunity?" And it's what you just said. We don't want to talk about religion or race or politics in polite company, but we're going to have to start talking about all of them. We have a racial problem that drives our inequity. We have a political problem that sustains it. And we have inadequate religion to transform it. In some ways, the reality behind all those categories makes certain that we make no progress. To get specific historically, and this is just one of the falls into the abyss, because we need to go back to slavery to talk about the economic impact on African American culture, families, and income. Every year a bill is introduced in the Congress that describes a program of reparations, and every year it's put aside. I want to say a little bit more about that in a moment. But the latest slide, the most precipitous slide, not only economically, but also in terms of how we look at each other, began under President Ronald Reagan. And he remains the champion of this generation. And his supply-side economics served white racism admirably and has destroyed our nation. Think about supply-side economics if we had applied it in 1946 in Europe and in North America. We have a crisis of the same magnitude that ravages our communities, destroys our children, and fills our prisons. And until we get our politics right and our economics right, we're not going to get the things right. Even if you've had a hard transformation about this subject, that's not enough. Because what we've got to have is a community transformation and a willingness to do what the pastor just said so well. Surrender for the benefit of others in light of the fact that we're all going to be made better by it. We got to work that out for us. This current administration and the last election is indicative of our pathology. And that is not a partisan statement. That is just simply an observation of the shenanigans that's going on in our nation's capital currently. And the demise of courageous leaders who will just stand and shut up. Just vote for the right thing and don't play games. It's what we need, but it's not what we have. If you have questions, we'll let Randy answer them. Yes, ma'am.
Maybe we could have it on the microphone, that way everybody can hear.
You want me to come down there?
Yeah, if you're okay with it. We do, in case you run into a friend who's like, oh my God, you should have seen this. Doc over there is recording everything, and when we do the questions on the microphone, it just helps with the recording. So, with that, go ahead.
Every once in a while I'm struck how I raise my hand before I know exactly what I'm going to say, and I'm really struck when I'm called down to the front. And then I learn that it's being recorded. But let's be brave. So I keep thinking when in rooms like this and having this conversation that what we don't address in our country explicitly is just the economics. Slavery was about economics. Any of these conversations is about money and safety and greed at a certain level, right? And while it makes me uncomfortable, not to see you, Reverend, but to hear you say the things that you just said, right? I think that part of what we're called to do is just really address how much value we place on wealth. It's important to hear these statistics. It's important to read this book and to know what those the division of wealth and economy in neighborhoods is. But I also think we have to take a really big look at why is that? I mean, the elephant in the room, and it's also a donkey in the room sometimes too, is how much value we place on what we get and what we assume comes with this American dream of wealth. So I guess my point, and I didn't know it when I raised my hand down there, is valuing people and relationship in a neighborhood that doesn't necessarily mean the house with the fence, but it also does, it is represented by that. It's both and, you know, am I willing to be in an uncomfortable situation and create a relationship, and I guess essentially I'm saying it's important to address the economics completely, because that's what gets us here, but it's also not the answer. It's not always the answer to go for our division of money. I hope this is making sense. If it doesn't, I'll watch it on the video later.
Let me reply to that just briefly. I work with beautiful people who have nothing. And it occurred to me this morning as I was walking across the parking lot to my office, and I observed a gentleman walking and a woman walking toward the Workforce Commission's office to get a popular job. There was about their demeanor and their gait a resignation that they were battling really hard to overcome. I've seen it a million times. It breaks your heart when you see it, because you know they're not in their predicament for lack of effort. They're in their predicament because of a basic fundamental unfairness that serves me. And we've got to break through that. So it's not just about money, but it is always about money. We're Calvinistic. My apologies to Wesley. You might follow. And the mark of election in this culture, especially in this city, is wealth. And so we're not just talking about our finely manicured backyards, we're talking about our salvation. And so to surrender that mythology to something that's true is going to cause us to do things quite differently at a scale that could be transformative. Mr. Lewis? I'm sorry.
No, just briefly, I want to appreciate the sentiment. And the reality is, in America, the commodification of black bodies has always been most important. To the extent that black bodies make money, they have been valued. To the extent they are inherently created in the image of God, they have been dismissed. And even to today, the commodification of black bodies breeds true. Look after, which is very interesting. I appreciate the question about how this happened. When you look at how black bodies are presented in antebellum period, 19th century, we are docile, we are gentle, we are kind, we are the loyal family pet there to serve. In the midst of the fight for emancipation and the beginnings of Reconstruction, all the way up to birth of a nation, the view dramatically shifts to one of terror and of brutality and violence, and that's the prevailing view today. And what happens is that while we were enslaved and therefore commodified, we were presented as docile and peaceful because that was good for business. Now being brutes is also good for business because it supports our mass incarceration structures. And I think it's very important to connect the dots, and I'll surrender the mic very quickly here. When we look at Ferguson, Missouri, and Balch Springs, Texas, the way those municipalities make their money is very similar in terms of ticketing black and Latino bodies. I think there is no mistake that we have a bullet in the frame of Michael Brown and a bullet in the head of Jordan Edwards locally, because the system is driven around this terrorization of black bodies. And the economics continues to reap benefits for those who are in power.
I wanted to ask a specific question about a specific policy. Since we're talking about wealth as opposed to income, and that is the policy of what are called reverse mortgages. And I believe, following on your remarks, Larry, that was something that was introduced in the Reagan administration or legalized. And basically where someone who reaches the age of 62 can basically sell their home to a bank or a lending institution or whatever, get payments for it, but the result of that is that their children do not inherit the property in question. So I would be curious as to get your opinions on whether or not that has been a contributing factor to the situation in which we find ourselves.
I do not know. I love to see the demographics. I've seen the slick commercials. I don't know who takes advantage of that. That'd be interesting to know. Do you know?
My name is Bill Benson. I'm here. The one thing about racism that is I personally celebrate is you and I share grandchildren more and more frequently. I mean, multiracial families are becoming more and more and more normal, and that's the biggest news in the country. But there's something that in this whole talk today was not mentioned about the growing gap. And I think it is the major tool of the gap, and that's our regressive taxation system. It is really allowing the wealth to build with a small minority, while those of us with the least money are paying the largest percentage of our income in taxes, in user fees, in local state taxes, etc. How are we going to address that?
Great question. I don't know that I can speak with all the specifics, but I want to address this. One of my favorite shows on Netflix is House of Cards. And there was a quote from this last season. I won't get it exactly, but it resonated with me, which is that the power is not always the power you see. Sometimes the power is the power behind the power. That is to suggest sometimes we are so fixated on elected officials and what they are doing in terms of legislature and policy that we fail to see or take a real close look at who is funding them. Because that is truly the power behind the power that gets them to enact the policies that benefit the minority rather than the majority. So to that point, to that extent that we have taxation and the ways in which it's going, I'm always looking at who's really funding this enterprise. Because the reality is, in this democracy, the people's voice really isn't what matters. It's the lobby's voice. It's the dollars. And until we seize the power back, and we seize the power back by sending folk home when they don't do what's in our best interest, we'll continue to perpetuate this reality that hurts us. Now let me press back even further still to show you how dramatic, because I think racism and race is a part of the overarching conversation. Why is it that so many white poor people vote against their interests? Let's deal with that, right? And I would suggest that in Dr. King's book, or several of his books, I'm glad we mentioned his books today, but Why We Can't Wait, I've been revisiting that text written in 1964. He suggests that when it comes to poverty in a white frame, they are more beholden to whiteness and the inherent divinity thereof, that they will do anything to preserve it, even to their own personal detriment. And so we've seen even in this past election, individuals who had voted for a candidate and for policies that are further decimating their realities, but they did so behind the banner of white supremacy.
And that was orchestrated. I'd refer you to a classic C. Van Woodward's The Strange Career of Jim Crow, in which Woodward outlines the fact that in the late 19th century, between the end of the Civil War and the populist movement of the 1880s and 1890s, we were making great progress on racial integration in this country until the vested mercantile interests used racism to divide poor white farmers and poor black farmers, and they ended the farmers' movement that really perpetuated what you just described in terms of the identity, the self-identity and understanding of white, especially men. And so since that time, we've had this deepening division, and we haven't dealt with our great national sin. But when we could have, we were on the road to doing that, even elected a populist senator in Kansas who was really on this line. But our own history has been defined by intentional hatred that's driven our racial reality. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, to kind of piggyback off of what the first lady said, I kind of forgot the train of thought when she was saying about just really focusing on the person and not the look. I kind of think that she was more along talking about the lines of not just focusing on how much money I guess they make, but to kind of look at it from a standpoint when I look at the people who aren't making as much and trying to find affordable housing. It kind of brought me there. And money is very important when it comes to being able to have affordable health care, to be able to have benefits such as retirement, to be able to live after you finish working. So my thing was, how do we address the housing market in terms of renting and where it's not even affordable for those who are making minimum wage, which is like $750, and you have rent that's $750 for a one-bedroom. You're not making the money to be able to afford to stay in the one-bedroom. So it's a big issue in my field of work, when we trying to find housing for someone who, even after we've assisted them, because my program is not a long-term program, them being able to afford to stay in a place that they have 5 children, and you're looking at a 2-bedroom, because you can't stay in a 1-bedroom with 5 children. They limit the amount of individuals who can stay in an apartment. And a 1-bedroom, not a 1-bedroom, a 2-bedroom is costing $800 to $900 a month, and the mother is only making minimum wage.
And that doesn't work. And there's a shortage of affordable workforce housing, which you've obviously pointed to. There's also a shortage of landlords who will take housing vouchers and so there's payer source discrimination that's just rampant. And we work in the area all the time trying to house people who are very, very poor and have nowhere to live and are homeless, right? You've described a family problem that is rampant across the community, and the growth in poverty and its concentration from 2013 to 2015 on the map Randy didn't have would show you that this is a deepening problem. Very, 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 very much problem. And there's going to be a public policy response to it that we haven't discovered nor have we been willing to pursue.
One of the pieces of rhetoric I did not appreciate from the presentation, not that it was any error on your part, and just I want to push back against it, is this idea of defining a good neighborhood. I've been a resident of South Dallas for almost a decade. The majority of people I encounter, regardless of race in this city, do not define my neighborhood as a good neighborhood. That's problematic for me, because they're good and beautiful and benevolent people who have been within their community and are still there for generations. So let's deal with some of the vices that are present and while they are there. The difficulty for South Dallas is not inherent to South Dallas, is that South Dallas, I'm talking to you, sister, don't go along. Issue of South Dallas is that South Dallas doesn't own South Dallas. And the folk who own South Dallas benefit from the pathologies present. They make a lot of money by renting homes to known drug dealers. And then they take those wealth and they place it within churches across North Texas as a part of their tithing and support of our local institutions. The question we have to ask ourselves is really, why do we have the realities we have? And it's really a vile corporate culture that benefits, that profits on persecuting people. And that's throughout the board, from affordable housing to the like. Closing the door, shutting the door. And it's pressed even further upon me because I made the initial remarks, and I stand behind them. And to the point that was made initially, if I've not made you uncomfortable in the space today, I'm not doing my job. Because my role is to horrify you. I want you to look at this big black body and recognize the pain that is being inflicted culturally, systematically, economically, politically on my people even today. The challenge we have as a region, even as a city, is what do we say for a city that makes more millionaires than any other a city in America, added over 100,000 jobs to this region in 1 year, the only city in America to do that, and yet leads the nation in childhood poverty, particularly children that are black and brown. And yet we feel so proud about our international city. And we won't even cross over to the southernmost side. That's our reality, that's our problem. We won't fix any of the issues, housing, education, you name it, until we see our plight across I-30 and recognize that our destinies are interwoven, as Dr. King would say, and that we will never be great if we're leaving whole masses of our populace behind.
Let me open up one more can. You can have a seat if you like. Or you can stay there, whatever. Let me tell you a Fair Park story. You know Fair Park? I don't know what your vision is of Fair Park, but I gave up on big text a long time ago. Let's put big text at the North Park. If you want to have your family photograph, maybe your Christmas card, we put it down there in North Park. I read a consultant's report dated 1968. The city of Dallas had paid for it to come in and look at the problem of Fair Park, quote unquote, problem of Fair Park. And among other findings, the report printed out in black and white on the paper that the Negro problem was a big part of the issue, because while people who lived in Dallas would come to the fair and not be troubled by that, guests from out of town, or friends who had never been there before, would be troubled by the presence of Negro shacks that bordered the park. The consultant made the recommendation that maybe a way to control or deal with that was to create a barrier. Guess what the barrier was or became? The parking lots. So now we don't have to be in such close proximity to the Negro shacks. I can't talk about Fair Park in rational terms to people who don't want to talk about that. That's the history of the place, and the place needs to be redeemed for economic development and opportunity and education and the arts and science and all the rest for the kids who are in that good neighborhood. That park can become a mecca of this city. But currently we're still shackled with that old vision, in my opinion.
I want to do one thing before we leave, because we've got like 3 more minutes. And Victoria didn't want to ask the question, so I'm going to embarrass her by saying it was her question, but it is a very good question. What steps can each one of us, rather than going home and saying, man, that was great, and then getting on with our lives, what concrete steps can we take as individuals to bring about some real change?
I begin, if I can be so bold, as to offer my latest book entitled Stakes is High, Raise Faith, Hope for America. It's published in February by Chalice Press. It's been recommended as new and noteworthy by Sojourners Magazine. Faith and Leadership at Duke University has recommended the text. Publishers Weekly also recommended in terms of race and faith in America, as well as recently Evangelicals for Social Action. So I've been on a national tour engaging a number of communities concerning this text. And I will say that I think within the text is a possible blueprint for the way forward. The reality is, and I'll say this, is that it is going to take far more than lip service to get there. And the courage and hope to bring about the change that is needed is sitting in your seat. The question is, how will we depart from here and make odyssey in this world as change, hope dealers to bring about new realities to our brothers and sisters near and far? I think one of the challenges, and I think it gets to the point, is that we are amongst those who, frankly, are literate and have enough economic capital to where we may not be hourly wage holders, so we can take off some time to come and talk about a book that describes the issues of our society. The question is, will we have the courage to change it? and not in some far outreach space. I'm talking about right here within our community. I think it is a sin before God that people see this city largely as a Christian city where mega churches abound. And yet I know, as a pastor in South Dallas, the solution to the homeless problem was to push the homeless away from the northern development into my community. And largely, frankly, to turn a blind eye to it. Until we take responsibility for our history, how that history informs our present, and have the courage to shape a new future, this is going to be in reciprocal form. In the next 25 years, the Lord spare our life, we'll gather here together and we'll be discussing the same issue. It's going to take a multiplicity of initiatives that inform, empower, and shape our society at all levels to bring about a new change. And I believe we're working in many ways, not so much so that we can reap the benefits tomorrow, but we're really trying to plot out a new reality and shape the world that our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren will inherit. This is hard work. We did not get here overnight. This is centuries upon centuries of subjugation, oppression, and marginalization. And you don't get to opt out and being a part of the change by saying, it's not my fault, I didn't do it. Particularly when you still benefited from it. It's going to take all of us. I believe we can do it, but we have to, above all things, have the courage necessary to make it happen.
Thank you, Pastor. Mr. Holman, my friend.
Last word to Mr. Holman.
All right, thank you. When you mentioned Fair Park, Larry, I was at the Fair Park meeting Monday. Okay, and the councilman made a comment. He said, we're going to make sure that African Americans get their fair share of these contracts. And you know how political people, they speak and they want some applause. When he made this statement, I'm the only person that applauded. Okay, and the reason I'm mentioning this point, there was like 20% black, 80% white. Okay, so when white people kind of like, I'm not comfortable with him saying that black people are going to get their fair share of these contracts or giving that image off. That's an issue there because we just want fairness. We don't want to be, take over. We just want fairness. If we're 30% of the population, we want 30% of the contracts, not 3%. That's why our neighborhoods are so impoverished. So I just want to make sure that you all understood what this gentleman is saying. And this is a real grassroots issue. We don't have any money in our community. And when we try to get something, we don't get the support from the white community. Gentlemen like Larry. Larry knows me when I was homeless. Larry helped me get out of homelessness. So Larry's a closer brother than me than some African Americans are. Because he helped me when I needed him. Okay? So I just want to make that statement.
Thank you.
Hey, that we're through here. This, thanks to my
Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen,
This is William, hopefully your favorite videographer from Two Hats Publishing. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you like it, please leave comments below, or like, follow, or subscribe to us and get notices of all our videos. We love it, even when you call.